The student assignment was to paint a picture of a woman in a living room and to focus on certain elements: tonal masses, placement, posing the figure, values, and simplifying. And I'll be taking a look at Emily's painting to see how successfully she handled these elements. I would like to draw your attention to how Emily cropped or cut off most of this piece of furniture here on the right side, and also what appears to be part of a picture hanging on the wall. These are called outcroppings, and they're very disturbing. You should avoid them. When you show an object, show more of it than just a small part of it, like Emily did. This draws the viewer's attention to the borders and out of the picture. It's rather disturbing to the viewer, and it should be avoided in your paintings. Emily's picture lacks a focus. Everything is competing with everything else. There's no center of interest. The surroundings, all of these items here, are all competing with the figure in the foreground. The figure was painted rather stiffly. Looks more like a mannequin. The most important part of Emily's painting should be the figure. That means that the surroundings must be simplified so that they do not compete with the center of interest or attention. These surroundings compete because they have been carried too far in detail. They've been made too exact, too detailed, too elaborate. Therefore, they attract too much attention. If they had been simplified and the figure and the foreground made more elaborate, more detailed, then the focus would be on the figure and not the surroundings. The figure is overwhelmed by the interior. It seems almost lost within it. The surroundings, in order not to attract so much attention, should be handled in a more suggestive manner, rather than in such a detailed way. Also, the entire room, as well as the figure, seem very stiff, very rigid, due to the many straight lines that are found throughout the painting. You can see them in the drapery, in the lamp, foreground lamp. Too many straight, hard lines. Here is my revised sketch of Emily's painting. Compare it with Emily's painting at the top right, and you can see the many changes that I've made. Foremost are the changes I made in terms of eliminating much of the furniture, which really isn't necessary to suggest a living room. The surroundings have been simplified and no longer detract attention from the center of interest, which is the figure in the foreground. Also, as you can see, I've turned the figure to the right so you can see more of her and put her in a more graceful pose. She no longer looks stiff like in Emily's painting. Here she looks more lifelike, more animated, more interesting. The couch in Emily's painting detracts too much attention from the figure in the foreground. It has a pattern which is also distracting, and when you place a foreground shape against another shape in back of it, it can be rather confusing looking. If you look at my revised drawing, there aren't any shapes or any furniture pieces in back of the figure, confusing the figure in the foreground. There's nothing to confuse the shape of the figure in the foreground because the background behind her is clean, rather empty. The foreground figure shape makes for a clean, easy-to-read silhouette shape placed against a simple, uncluttered background, which causes this foreground figure shape to read clearly. So if you want your foreground figures to read clearly, then place them against simple, uncluttered, unpatterned backgrounds, as I have done here in my example. Take a look at Emily's painting in the upper right, And this area that I'm circling was rather complicated looking, too confusing, too distracting from the figure. See how I have simplified this area? Now it no longer detracts from the figure because also part of it has been overlapped or covered up with the chair, with the back of the chair. I have eliminated the table in Emily's painting. I'm circling right here. It is interfering with the shape of the figure in front of it. It makes for a confusing looking area. The table detracts from the figure. Always try to create interesting foreground shapes, such as the one that I'm outlining here in my revised drawing, that read clearly against an uncluttered background. If I put a lot of different shapes back here, coffee table and the couch, she would then no longer read as clearly as she does now. That is, those other shapes in the background would then detract attention from the foreground figure. And this is a shape within this overall shape. There are shapes within shapes. And they should all read clearly. Take a look at Emily's painting. If she had moved in on the figure, this would have eliminated much of the room. And therefore, more attention would have been focused on the figure. By moving in on the figure, as I have done in my revised sketch, the room has become less important and the figure more important. When posing your figures, always try to get the most interesting pose possible. Not a stiff pose like in Emily's painting, but rather a pose that has a natural look to it. One way to do that is to have a curved linear line or reversed curve going throughout the figure, like this. This kind of reversed curve gives grace and movement to the pose. You build your pose on this reversed curve, on this beautiful curving line, which will make your figures look graceful, and you'll avoid a stiff-looking figure by doing this. So first you can establish this curved linear or reversed curve line, and then start building the figure on this line. I'll indicate some of the parts of the figure, like the head, on this line, to show you how it can be done. The neck, and then the upper torso, and the pelvis, and the thigh, the lower leg. You see, something like that. But you have this line going through the entire figure. I've indicated the curving line in green, as you can see, so that it's more visible. And now I'd like to talk about total masses in a picture. I'm going to pull down my tissue paper here and place it right over my revised drawing so that you'll better be able to see what I'm drawing on top of this revised version of Emily's painting. First of all, when you plan your picture in terms of tones or values, it's best to start planning with masses of values without any details within those masses. Think of your shapes in your picture in terms of simple tonal masses. Think of them as abstract shapes without any detail in them. Indicate them in simple terms, such as I'm doing here. The curtain is just one simple gray mass of tone. Always plan your pictures in the simplest terms possible. I lightened the tonal mass in the background a little bit. It was a little too dark. I want to create a greater sense of depth, and in order to do that, that tonal mass had to be lightened, And the foreground tonal mask that I'm indicating now that represents the chair can be made darker. And by making this tonal mask darker and the one in the distance lighter, a greater sense of depth is achieved. These tonal masses need to be distributed throughout your picture so that they balance. If you have a tonal mass on the right, have one on the left that will balance the one on the right, for example. And now I'm going to indicate the darkest tonal mass, which is the dress of the woman. These tonal masses should create a definite shape. Be without detail. They're used to plan your shapes and what the values are going to be, and where your shapes and values are going to be placed within your composition. By doing this, you're creating the picture's tonal structure. And once you've established this tonal structure in simple terms, as I've done here, for example, then you can start adding other tones to these basic tonal masses. So, like, for example, I'm adding a darker value to this dark dress, adding a fold and some lines here. See how I'm defining the form underneath? I'm adding another tone, and thereby I'm modeling the form underneath. I'm adding detail on top of this simple tonal mass. This could be carried further by adding other tones, like, for example, light could be striking her leg, making it a lighter tone here, or then in the upper part of her body I can add a lighter value. And you see how it's beginning to take shape, becoming more complex, and this kind of tonal variation can then be added to these simple basic tonal masses and made more complex and more interesting. Now, if I wanted to, I could go in where the tonal mass of the chair is, and I could add a lighter tone there, or a lighter value. A tone is a value on the value scale. Thereby, I've given this chair a feeling of three-dimensionality. Also down here, I could add a lighter tone, which will help further to create this more three-dimensional looking chair. And this could be carried further by adding even more tones. But the important thing to remember is not to lose the basic overall tonal value of this tonal mass. For example, if the tonal mass is dark, like this dark chair in the foreground, then it needs to remain dark even though you're putting other tones into it. Don't place tones that are so light within this darker tonal mass that you're going to break up the tonal mass and destroy its unity. I've returned to my original sketch, as you can see. This completes the critique on tonal masses, placement, posing of the figure, values, and simplifying. The things that I have shown you here need to be thoroughly understood and applied to every picture you paint. They will definitely improve your work if they are understood correctly and applied.